Hey guys, and welcome back to another lesson. Today we're going to talk about reharmonization. We're going to take a simple melody with simple chords and progressively swap them out for crazier and crazier variations. The melody we're going to use is a fairly well-known one. It goes like this. The melody's name is Night and Day. It's actually an old jazz standard. It's kind of one of those melodies that people seem to know but aren't sure where it comes from. Now, you can see on the screen kind of the starting chords, and now you can see the sort of end goal we're going to aim for. And what I hope to do is to walk you through step by step through the thought process of reharmonizing a tune. So we're going to start out with this simple progression of 4 chords, C major to an A minor to an F major and G major. And before we do this, I want to make a few comments so we have kind of a framework to work within. The melody and the progressions we're going to analyze are all written in the key of C, meaning that everything is built on the scale of C major. Now we're going to refer to chords not necessarily by their names all the time, but by their degrees. So in the C major scale, you number the notes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, which is just 1 again. And then you think about things not in terms of the actual notes, but rather in terms of the degrees and how they lead into each other. So I'm going to make use of different concepts from jazz theory. I'm not necessarily going to go in depth into every single one of them, but because my point here is to give you an overview of the thought process of reharmonizing a tune. So otherwise it's going to be a very, very long video. Rather, you have a link in the description to my YouTube jazz course for beginners that will give you a much more slow and structured approach to many of these ideas. Okay. Having said that, let's get started. The first thing that we can do is when playing these chords, we can make sure that we have the correct inversions. So we're going to take these, triads and just invert them so that the voice leading is fairly smooth. And my point here is that you can work out your own inversions, but the point is that you always need to be mindful of your inversions. Now, another thing that you can do when playing this is you can, instead of using simple triads, use 7th chords. So for example, instead of playing a C major, you'll play a C major 7. Instead of playing an A minor, you can play an A minor 7. Instead of playing an F major, you can play an F major 7, or maybe an F major 9 if you add this G down here, and a G dominant 7. And you can take this, of course, and again, you can use whatever inversions you want. Another small point that you might start out with is think about doing some simple substitutions, especially whenever you play the 4th. So remember, the F is the 4th degree of the C major scale. Whenever you play the major 4th, you can substitute it for the minor 2. So instead of having a C to an A minor to an F major to a G, you can have a C to an A minor to a D minor to a G. And in terms of the motion that you're doing when you're doing this is, you're doing a 1 to a 6 minor, to a 2 minor, to a 5, to a 1, right? To an A minor, D minor, G dominant 7, C major 7. And this kind of motion and force is a very powerful and fundamental idea in jazz theory, and we're going to encounter it as well down the road. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the final chord in each of the lines that I'm playing. So there are a total of 5 lines in this that just repeat themselves. And the last chord in each line is a G, or a G dominant 7. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to substitute, we're going to replace it. Now, for pedagogical reasons, I'm going to do something slightly different in each row to give you an idea of the variety of choices that you have. You don't have to do this. I'm going to be a little bit proactive in my reharmonization, maybe go a little bit overboard, so you can get all these little types of different small ideas that you can then later on play with. What we're going to do is this is going to be a substitute for the 5. The 5 is almost always a dominant 7th chord when working within regular quote-unquote jazz harmony, and you can do a couple of different substitutions for the 5, which the 5 here is a G, so a G dominant 7. You can play instead a flattened 7th dominant chord. So the flattened 7th, this is the 7th degree, you flatten it to a B flat, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, flatten, and you can play a dominant 7 here. And this is called a backdoor dominant. So instead of playing the dominant 7th on the 5th degree, you play the dominant 7th on the flattened 7th degree. So I actually do this in the second line. Now another thing that you can do is instead of playing a dominant 7th chord, maybe play a 7 sus4 chord. Or you can add a higher degree and play a 7 or 9 sus4 chord. So for example, that's a nice voicing that you have right here for a G9 sus4. Or you could just play a G7 sus4. And you can play around with these variations. For example, you can play another G9 sus4 chord, G9 sus4. There are many different voicings for this, but you're basically playing a G9 and you're taking the 3rd and you're making it sus4 instead. You're omitting the 3rd and playing the 4th degree instead in the scale on which G is constructed, which is the G major scale. Another substitution is playing the minor 4th. So in this case it would be an F minor chord. Now again, you can play different higher extensions. You can play an F minor 6 or an F minor major 7. F minor 7, you have to be a little bit careful because you're adding notes that are outside the C major scale. So you always have to be extra sure that you're not conflicting with your melody. And this is kind of something that is universally true when it comes to chord substitutions. Whenever you substitute something, the first requirement is that it not clash with the melody that you're playing. There are many sort of ideas for substitutions, but they don't always work equally well. So with these substitutions, you get something like okay, now let's go really line by line and start with the first line and think about how can we approach the reharmonization. So the first line, you have a C going to an A minor going to an F. Now, often when you reharmonize something, when you change the harmonies, the chords, what you do is you say, where do I need to get to? Let's say in this case, I want to get to an F major. And then you just basically scrap everything in between. Let's say my starting point is going to be a C major, my end point is going to be an F major. So you scrap everything in between and you ask yourself, well, how can I get to this final point? It's kind of a very fundamental way of thinking about reharmonization. And there are many, many different answers to this. We're going to see a few as we go along. But one thing that you can do is maybe do a motion in fourths downward. Now, when you do a motion in fourths downward, I mean, say, playing a chord and then moving down a perfect fourth to the chord that is a perfect fourth below it. Let's say I want to get to an F, so I can play a B flat major to the F major, maybe to a C major. And I can do this successively, right? I can do an E flat major to a B flat major to an F major, and then maybe to a C major. So this is exactly what I'm going to do here. I'm going to do a motion in fourths going down. Sometimes this is called a Plagal cadence. It's a famous Beatles song with a little help from my friends. That's kind of how the chorus goes. And this kind of has very gospel sound to it. Anyway, here we're going to do something a little bit different. Remember that we have a melody that has the upper note as C, that just repeats itself. So this is going to anchor the way we voice our chords. So I'm going to play a B flat major to an E flat major to a B flat major to an F major, but I'm going to maybe voice it slightly differently. So I'm going to play an E flat 6-9, then maybe I can do a B flat major 9, and then to an F major 9. You can think of these chords as polychords because I'm playing a B flat major in the left hand and an F major in the right hand. It's still a B flat major 9 chord, just different. That's kind of giving you a different way of thinking about the voicing. So it will sound something like this. And I can even add maybe a G in between. So what I'm doing here really is just approaching F from above, and I've added sort of this middle note chord here. It's not very important. I'm going to keep it in there. It doesn't have really some underlying big idea behind it. I just like it. Now let's look at the second half of this line. I want to keep this speed at which I change the chords constant. So I'm going to change really the chord on each beat. That will give me some more breathing room to make more crazy chord changes. So I want to get basically from an F to a G. So I'm going to think about what happens to the bass. The bass is going to be an F, but I want it to move like this. And this is part of a longer motion that you can sometimes see in many, many songs where you have a descending bass line. It goes like this. Okay, now I could have reharmonized things like this. I'm gonna do it crazier, of course, just to keep things more interesting, but I'm basically doing this in the second half. So and to make things even more interesting, here I have this voicing is a C major 9 over a bass of E. And here, instead of playing a D minor or a D minor 7 or D minor 9, why don't we play something like a D dominant 7th chord? So, and to do it even more interesting, why don't we have some altered higher degrees? So something like either a flat 5 and a flat 9. Remember, we want to keep the upper melody note, or keep it in mind at all times. Or we can do a D13 with a flat 9. So, or maybe sounds pretty good, at least to my ears. Okay, let's do the first line from beginning to end. Again. Now let's take a look at the second line. Remember, you always have to keep the melody in mind. So how are we going to reharmonize this? We can just do the first line again. Not necessarily exactly so, because again the melody has changed, so a lot of our choices for chords can change alongside it. So you have to be always mindful of the melody, and something that you've done before might not be optimal now. So if now I have this, it will clash with the B flat. It will clash with the B flat, with the E flat, all of these chords that worked well when C was the upper note. Instead, I'm going to do something slightly differently, and I'm going to use 2-5-1s. And what do I mean by this? Again, I have a starting point and I have an end point. So I want to go from C to A minor. Now, if I know my target, I can do a 2-5-1 to approach it. This is an A minor, and I can do a minor 2-5-1. So in the key of A minor, I can take any minor scale I want. Let's say use this, and then a 2-5-1 will be moving from the chord built on the 2nd degree to the chord built on the 5th degree to the chord built on the 1st degree. Remember, we're momentarily thinking in the scale of the target chord, which is A minor. This is called tonicization. So I can do maybe something like this, right? So 2-5-1 in the key of A minor, B minor, E major, A minor. And I can do the same thing for the second half. So here I have, right? So what I can do is I'm starting on the F major, but I'm gonna treat it as the target. I'm gonna squeeze in some chords in between and delay the F major. So I'm gonna do a 2-5-1 in the key of F major. Here's F major, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1. The 2 is a G, the 5 is a C, the 1 is an F. And usually you do it at 2 minor. When it's a major target, you do a 2 minor to a 5 major or dominant 7th chord to the 1, which is the target chord, which in this case is an F. So it's a G minor or G minor 7, a C, dominant 7, to an F major 7. So maybe something like this. So I'm just applying 2-5-1s in a row in succession. I'm going to do one more trick, which is a tritone substitution. Basically, whenever you have a dominant 7th chord, this also works for non-dominant 7th chords often, but it's really for classic applications for dominant 7th chords, you can swap it out for a dominant 7th chord, which is a tritone away, either up or down. It's the same thing. So if I do something like, something like this, I can take the dominant 7th E chord and swap it for dominant 7 B flat, right? Because if I take the E and go up a tritone or down a tritone, I get to a B flat. So I can play a B flat dominant 7th chord here. So this means that I can play and I can do the same thing for the second half. Instead of playing the C dominant 7, I play an F sharp dominant 7. Now, you see there, it kind of clashes with the melody, so I have to alter, or try to alter, one of the degrees of the chord, and I'm going to flatten the fifth. So, instead of playing an F sharp dominant 7, I'm playing an F sharp dominant 7 flat 5. Now to be even smoother about this, you can really kind of think about the voice leading and try to make everything as chromatic as possible, and these 2-5-1s with tritone substitutions really lend themselves well to this. So have a listen. Sound pretty good? Let's put everything together. And second half. Not bad. Let's look at the third line. Again, the same set of chords. Yeah, only here I'm using an F minor 6 at the end, right? Because we did a dominant substitution for the 5 previously. So what can we do here? Well, again, there is no one single correct answer. I've chosen to go for chromatic motion. So chromatic motion is always almost always works, not always, but often works, where you know what your target chord is, and you approach it either from below, with a chord below it, or from above it. It can be a major chord or a minor chord. It really depends on the mood and the melody and many different things. I'm here going to approach things chromatically from below. So I'm going to use maybe an A flat major 7 here to approach the A minor 7, and D flat major 7 to approach, instead of an F, remember I'm substituting the F for a D minor, or D minor 9 in this case. So playing the melody note here, and then A flat major 9, A minor 9, D flat major 9, D minor 9. And now I can just climb up with the bass. Right, so I'm just minding or thinking in terms of the motion of the bass. And remember, I mentioned that these descending or ascending bass lines sometimes can be very powerful in harmonizing stuff, and I'm just borrowing a small portion of that here, going from a D to a C over the bass of E to an F, and then an F minor. And then adding the nice higher degrees and tensions and so on. So it's just an upwards bass motion here. What about the next line, the fourth line? Well, I'm going to use the same trick. I'm going to think in terms of the bass. Often when you think in terms of the bass, it kind of helps you bring everything else into the right sort of order. So I'm going to... It repeats again the same melody. And what I want to do here is maybe try and do some chromatic motion with the bass. Now once I've decided upon that, it's really an issue of figuring out the chords that should go over it. So starting from a C, I know where I'm starting, right? I know where I'm ending. It's on a G or G dominant 7 or G 9 sus 4 or something. And then everything needs to move chromatically from there. So I'm gonna play it and then I'm gonna give you some of the reasoning behind. Okay, so what am I doing here? Again, chromatic motion. Now, again, chromatic motion, everything is moving chromatically in the first half. And in the second half, the bass moves from a C to an F to a D to a G, which is almost like moving from a C to an F, which can be substituted for a D, to a D to a G. So it's almost like a 2-5-1. Let's take a look at the last line of the melody. Now, it's the same set of 4 chords. What can we do here? Well, starting from the C major, maybe I'll make a substitution. Instead of playing a C major, I'm going to play an A minor. And this is called the relative minor substitution. Wherever you see a major chord, you can try and play the minor chord that is 3 semitones below it. So C major, I'm playing an A minor. And I'm going to do a motion in fourths. So going from the A minor to the D. So I'm going to play an A minor to a D major. Now I'm going to change the nature here to a D minor. I don't have to, I can keep the D major, right? Now this here doesn't sound that great, so I'm going to basically go from the A to the D, back to the A, and then back to the D. So for the first half of the line. Now, when I add the higher degrees, what I get is maybe something like this. An A minor 7 with this 11th degree here. A D 13th chord. A D minor 7 with the 11th here. An I'm going to do an A major 9 chord. Usually you'd play maybe a dominant 7, that's kind of the natural choice. But I like this a little bit of tension here. Not tension, but something that doesn't fit in. A little bit of something that is not classical jazz harmony. I just like sticking major 9 chords wherever I can. I just try it. Honestly, there's no deep reasoning behind it. So it just works in my ears. But if not, if it doesn't work in yours, you can play a regular A dominant 9 chord. Now here, what I could do is again do a bass that goes up. I'm going to start here. But what I choose to do is something like this. Now, where does this come from? Is there a deep underlying idea behind it? Well, the answer is no. There's no theory that I can give you as to why this works. Honestly, the reason I do this is, one, I like it, and two, I actually heard it done in a classical piece by Aaron Copland, the Appalachian Spring ballad. And he has a beautiful section there that he has this kind of very dissonant motion. It's a 2-5-1, but he superimposes on it these triads on top that supposedly don't fit, but to my ears sound really great. And I've really come to like this over the years, and I kind of use it sometimes when I play. Again, there's no deep theory behind it in my view. It's just sort of two ideas coming together that are not necessarily connected, but this 2-5-1 motion in the bass really grounds it. And it's kind of the same thing here. I can get away with a lot of weird things if the bass has a logical motion to it. So maybe something like this. Now, instead of playing an F, I can play a 2-5 here, so play maybe a D. Instead of playing an F, I can play a D minor. And then instead of playing a D minor, I can play a D7 or D9 or something along those lines. And because I like to stick these major 9 chords everywhere I go, here's one here as well. A D major 9 over the bass of F sharp. And then here's my G9 sus4. I'm going to leave you with the full piece to conclude with for your own listening enjoyment. I hope you've learned something interesting, and I will see you next time.